Well, good evening. Glad that you are here. I know that a lot of you are anxious for updates. I'm going to save that to the end when we're not recording. And so, good to see you tonight. There are handouts in the back. I hope that you picked one up on the way in. Janice, there was a check for you. Did you see that? Okay. I was number 8. Okay. Somebody else quickly tell her that there's a check back there for her. Okay. Oh, did they? I'm thinking, man, has God blessed us so much that we're just leaving money laying around? Amen. Oh, you got next week? Okay. Okay. I'll put a good word in for you, Lynette. We are going to try to finish, not going to try, we are going to finish Genesis 41 tonight. Just kind of recap for those that haven't been with us in our study. Welcome back, Ricky and Lucille. Hope that you guys, did you catch any fish? Well, you're not a fisherman, right? Oh, okay. You're like me. You're very much like me. Yeah. You go out there for the entertainment of the fish. Yeah. Say it again. Did he really? He is a fishing machine, that's for sure. Yeah, and his boys are too. So they're just, well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Hope that you guys had a great time. Welcome back. Just kind of recapping of where we were last Wednesday. Let me give you a heads up about next Wednesday, and I hope that you'll participate. Even if you sit in your car and pray, I would be content with that. School starts earlier this year. In fact, it starts in just 2 weeks. Am I not right, Janice? And so next Wednesday is our annual prayer walk. We always try to go the Wednesday before school starts. And if we only have 5 or 6 show up, then we really can't cover all of those campuses. And so would be very appreciative if you would join us and just picking a campus and going to it again. If you feel like it's too hot and you can't campus around 6, give you time to pray, and we'll meet at the high school flagpole around 6:45, and we'll pray, and then we'll dismiss. Okay, and so that will be our service next week. So if you come here, feel free to pray over here. But there will not be anybody else here, okay, because we'll be at the schools, and we'll make that announcement on Sunday morning as well. But getting back to our study for tonight, you'll remember that Joseph has had, from the time that he was 17, we're first introduced to Joseph, we're told that he is 17 years of age. You'll also be reminded that he was Daddy's pet. He was his dad's favorite child. Everything good between you guys? Okay. Okay, I always get nervous when I see couples sitting at opposite ends, okay, and so I'm not the best marriage counselor is, but I can help, okay, whatever you need. I'm just kidding, I'm kidding. Glad to know that everything's good. See, Bill, you've already got me distracted, brother. Huh? That's right, I forgot the air thing, that's right. But anyway, Joseph was 17 years of age. He was Daddy's pet son, if you will. He was his favorite. Matter of fact, his dad gave him a coat of many colors. Remember that? And then he had these 2 dreams. Remember that? We talk about the dreams of the sheaves. That's a Janice joke. Okay, for those of you that were here last week, she thought I said cheese. It was sheaves. Okay, and then he had the dream about the sun, the stars, and the moon. And the whole purpose of those dreams were a revelation to his father and his brothers that, hey, one of these days you guys are going to be serving me, okay, that I'm going to be an authority over you. Remember that boy, his brothers didn't take that very well, did they? In fact, when they were out herding sheep, Dad sends him, hey, go check on your brothers, make sure they're doing okay. So he goes out there, they see him coming. They begin to plan and connive, and they end up throw him in a pit, and they're thinking, well, we just can't leave him here. Let's make a profit off him. They sold him into slavery, and the group that bought him took him to Egypt, again sold him into slavery. You remember that? And then he was bought by a guy by the name of Potiphar. Served in Potiphar's household. God blessed him and used him mightily in that capacity. Served in Potiphar's house 2 or 3 years. And then Potiphar's wife tried to make the move on him and falsely accused him. And where'd that put him? Put him in a prison. So now he's gone from a pit to a prison. Served in prison for a period of about 10 years. You remember Pharaoh had, well, what am I talking about? Pharaoh had two guys, a baker and a servant, or butler, that he also sent to prison for whatever reason. Okay, he got upset with them, sent them to prison. And these two guys had a dream. Remember that? And Joseph interpreted those dreams. One was a positive dream for the butler, the baker, not so good. Remember, he had his head chopped off. Well, the butler, he said, hey, when you go back and restore to your position, remember me. And you come to the end of chapter 40, here's what you read. And the butler forgot about Joseph. Okay, whether that was intentional or slip of the mind, I don't know. And then, in chapter 41, Pharaoh now has a dream. He has a dream about seven good cows. I remember a guy who interpreted a dream for me, and it was an amazing thing. Let me tell you about him. And so he puts in a good word with Pharaoh. Pharaoh summons him. Remember, he changes his clothes, shaves his face, appears before Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him the dream. And again, Joseph spends a great deal of effort and time explaining, what God is the one who reveals the secrets in these dreams and then gives the interpret. And what's the interpretation? There's going to be 7 years of plenty. God's really going to bless the land for 7 years. But following that perfect good years, those good years of plenty, are going to come 7 very, very harsh years. In fact, the harsh years are going to be worse than the best of the good years. And you're going to see tonight, we get to verse 37 and following, where he said, I need to find someone who's wise, that somebody I can trust to be a steward over this going forward. And who does he pick? He picks Joseph. So think about this. Joseph goes from the pit to the prison to the palace. How's that for alliteration, right? The pit, the prison, and the palace. And that's where we pick up our study for tonight. Here's what I want to do. This is a narrative, and I'm just going to I'm going to try to hit these quickly tonight and kind of give you 5 major points as we work our way through this particular text. Again, we're going to try to move quickly through this, and then I want to end with what I think are 3 major points of application, or 3 takeaways that you and I can apply to our lives as well, because that ought to be the goal, right? You ought to be able to explain the text and then make some application. I like the way Adrian Rogers said it one time. Adrian Rogers talked about preaching and teaching, that preaching and teaching is very, very similar. And he talked about, if you have, he said, it begins with explanation. You need to explain the text. And then it helps if you have illustration, that is, you give a picture of how you apply the text. Okay, so you have explanation, you have illustration, and then you have application. But if you have explanation without application, or application without explanation, then it leads to frustration. And so you kind of go, well, I don't know, where do I fit in how my understanding of this text? And so that's my goal tonight, is to explain as we work our way through this text, and maybe even give an illustration or two, and then certainly apply to our lives. I want to pick up reading in verse 37, even though we covered part of this last week. Genesis chapter 41, if you're there, say I'm there. Genesis 41, beginning in verse 37. Let me read through verse 44, and then we'll come back and explain some of it. So this is after he has interpreted the dream. Okay, here's what it says. Verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom, now watch this, is the Spirit of who? The Spirit of God. Now, isn't that amazing? That his character and his integrity and the wisdom and discernment that God had given to him, that even a pagan recognized that the Spirit of God was upon and in Joseph's life. Verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this. Now keep in mind, how did he know that God had shown it to him? Because Joseph had made that very, very clear, did he not? That it is God who is the one who reveals the interpretation of these. And so all along, as we looked at Joseph's life, he's always speaking and seeking to glorify God in his life and promoting that, hey, it's God who's helping me do what I'm doing. The reason why I'm advancing and being blessed, even though these are very difficult circumstances, it is God's hand of mercy and blessing upon me. Verse 39 again, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. This is what Pharaoh notices about Joseph. And here's what he says. Look at what he does. He says, you shall be over whose house? My house. That's Pharaoh's house. Now watch this. And all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. So think about this. Joseph, in essence, is being made the prime minister of Egypt. If Pharaoh's the king, then Joseph is now the prime minister. That is, he's second in command of all of Egypt. Only Pharaoh ranks higher than him. In fact, just to prove the point here, in verse 41, the Bible says, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you. This is probably not near the level of authority that I'm wanting it to be, but I got to thinking about, have you ever been a notary public? Y'all remember back in the days? Now they just have those stamps, the ink stamps. But back in the day, they had those seals, for lack of better ways. I would say something like that, and that represented you, even though you had the state of Texas seal, but it also put your name, expiration date, and all that kind of stuff. Something similar, and again, this is probably not the best illustration in the world, but I just kind of give you an idea that this signet ring carried a great deal of weight for Joseph, because if for Joseph to say something to the other leaders and the other people of Egypt, and they'll say, who are you? And all he has to do is flash the ring. Oh, he's got the authority of Pharaoh, because that's not just a replica. That is Pharaoh's ring. This is Pharaoh saying, Joseph, you now have full authority. The only one that you can't exercise authority over is myself, okay? And this is very important. You look at verse 42. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him. Now watch this. It wasn't just the ring, but he clothed him in garments of fine linen. And did you notice this? He put a gold chain around his neck. So think about where Joseph's been. Joseph has gone from the pit to the prison and basically had nothing. All of what he had has been stripped of him. But now he's been given all of this. He's been given authority. He's been given wealth. He's got a gold chain around his neck. Verse 43, and he had him ride in the second chariot, his authority in the land. He was basically the king of Egypt. But now the same level of authority is being given to Joseph. And so when he goes through the land, it's being announced, look, here comes the prime minister. Here comes Joseph. Okay? And so here's the very first point I want you to get. I think the first major point is I want you to see Joseph's new status. Joseph's new status. Now, here's what I really want you to get on this. Did Joseph have any idea when he went before Pharaoh that he was going to get promoted like that? No, not at all. He had no clue. As far as he knew, he probably thought, you know what, I'm hoping for the best, probably expecting the worst, considering the way my life's gone so far. Probably expecting the worst, to get sent back down to prison, get my prison clothes back on. But I'm certainly hoping for the best. And so here's the thing. Joseph did not work the system. He did not connive in any way. He did not ask to be promoted. Matter of fact, he didn't say, hey, I've done this for you, now you do that for me. You don't see any of that. But what you see here is that God's hand of providence at work in this case. Wouldn't you agree? The providential hand of God is absolutely at work. So why would Pharaoh promote a guy like Joseph? Well, obviously, he wanted someone who had wisdom. Joseph certainly revealed that he had wisdom, but it was not just human wisdom. It was godly wisdom, godly discernment. And so you see God blessing Joseph in this case as well. But look, God doesn't just bless Joseph because he was faithful. But here's the thing I want you to get. Don't be so quick to run past that. That God is rewarding Joseph's faithfulness. Wouldn't you agree? But God is also setting Joseph up for several years. Everyone will probably have died, including his own family. And so this is God's way of preserving even his own people. And why was that necessary? That's true too. I don't know if you heard what Jill said, because Jesus is obviously going to come through the line, okay, down the future. But God's own integrity is at stake, because God had made a promise to Abraham and about his family. And so if the family is suddenly cut off before it's come to fruition, then God, you're now a liar, right? So God knows what he's doing, and all of God's people said. Aren't you grateful? And so that's the very first thing I want you to make note of. I want you to see Joseph's new status. He's gone again from the pit to the prison, now to the palace. This is not one where he manipulated the system or even asked for, but rather the providential hand and blessing of God upon Joseph's life. But here's the thing. Has Joseph proven himself to be faithful in the face of adversity? Let's take a vote. Has Joseph proven himself time and time again to be faithful to the Lord in the face of adversity? Is that easy to do? All right, here's the second question. Will Joseph prove himself to be faithful in the face of prosperity? Let me ask you this, and this is maybe kind of just pausing just for a little bit. Which do you think is easier? To show faithfulness in the face of adversity or to show faithfulness in the face of prosperity? I'm hearing both sides. Which one do you think is easier? In the face of adversity or in the face of prosperity? We'll take a poll. How many of you say, by the way, I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. So you're thinking, well, he's going to stick me if I throw my hand up. No, just be honest. What do you think? You think it's easier to be faithful to the Lord in the face of adversity? Raise your hand. I see Randy's back there voting. Okay. What about it's easier to be faithful to the Lord in the face of prosperity? You say, all right, Brother Bill, which one you voting? I'm voting for, and I'm not saying that anybody's right or wrong. This is just because we're just our opinion. I think it's probably easier in the face of adversity. Let me tell you why. Because when you go through adversity in your life, what are you doing? Well, we say it drives us to our knees, but then I think we realize just how dependent we are on God. And then when we begin to experience prosperity, things are going really, really well, we become almost self-dependent. And that can be very scary, right? And I'm not saying that everybody does it because not everybody is that way. I know some folks who the Lord has blessed immensely and they continue to serve the Lord faithfully, okay? But the point being is it's an interesting thought, which is easier. Would we say that he was faithful in adversity? Again, I think the answer is resounding yes. Will he be, hey, I've done this for you, I've scratched your back, now scratch mine? He didn't do that. Nor does he ask for this name, nor does he give himself this name. Where does he get this name from? We're told in verse 45 that Pharaoh called Joseph's name. Now I'm going to say this one time and one time only, okay? Because if I try to say it twice, I probably pronounce it two different ways, okay? Zaphnath-Paneah, okay? So Pharaoh called Joseph's name, these two words, and he gave him, we'll talk about this, and he gave him as a wife, Ashnath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, and Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Now, what does this Zaphnath-Paneah mean? Bob?
God speaks, he lives.
Huh?
God speaks, he lives.
That's not the answer. That's not the answer. It's the actual answer. Well, your Bible's wrong because I looked it up today. It actually means revealer of secrets, okay, or revealer of the unknown. What did you say it was? Okay. Probably. Okay. Well, I looked it up today. I took the time at first. I'm thinking, you know what? I'm just going to blow that off. But it means revealer of secrets or to come to understand the unknown. Okay. Now I find that very interesting that he's giving him this Egyptian name, and what's the significance of it? I think the significance of this, and then we're going to move on to the third point, is that Moses is, and keep in mind Moses is the writer of the book of Genesis, as he wrote the other 4 books of the Pentateuch. That Moses has given us the understanding that Joseph is fully being given to the culture of Egypt. But the big question is, will the culture influence him or will he influence the culture? And if you're not very careful, even in American culture, we can think about the American dream, and we've made an attempt. I say we, I'm talking about Christians in general, have made the attempt to Americanize Christianity. We need to be very careful, but I think that's a dangerous thing. Do you agree with that? His wife, Ashnath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And I'm just going to mention these two names, and we're going to move on. If you look back at verse 36, not 36, 46. Verse 46, we're told that Joseph was 30 years of age. So think about this. He was 17 when he was sold into slavery, worked a few years for Potiphar, was lied about by Potiphar's wife, and then went to prison. So you would think he's at least in prison for a minimum of 10 years. And we're told now at the age of 30 that he appears before Pharaoh. So 13 years. This is not just any average run-of-the-mill woman that's been given to him. This Potiphar, priest of On, okay, by the way, means given by the sun god. That's what the father of the bride, that's what his name means, given by the sun god. He is a pagan, okay? So he would be a priest among the sun gods, okay? The god that they served. And then Ashnath, which means one who belongs to Naith, Naith. Now, if you think about that, I think Moses is implying to us here that she was some type of priestess of an ancient goddess. And so she's a pagan woman as well. And that raises a very interesting question. You know, what in the world is Joseph doing intermarrying with not just a pagan woman who's a non-Hebrew? She's an Egyptian. She doesn't know the one true God, but she's involved in this other religion. Okay? Do you see the danger in that? The Bible warns us in the book of 1 Corinthians about not being unequally yoked. That is, one married person, a saved person marrying or even dating a lost person. And I know a lot of times I heard it time and time again, well, I love this man or I love that woman. Yes, I'm a believer and he's not. Or yes, I'm a believer and she's not. But I'm telling you something. If anybody could ever convert them, if anybody can ever change them, it's me. I'm telling you, I've seen it more times than not the other way around. It's not the Christian influencing and changing the lost person. It's the lost person impacting the saved person. And so under normal circumstances, I say this is probably not a good situation. But God's going to use it, and I think God's going to use the faithfulness of Joseph to be an influence into the life of his wife. And you'll say, why do you say that? Because I think you're going to see this as we see the fourth point. Not only Joseph's new status and Joseph's new surname and Joseph's new spouse, but we see Joseph's new offspring. Now, I know this is a stretch when it comes to alliteration, okay? But just work with me tonight, okay? Now, again, here's what I want you to see about this. We're going to skip verses 46 through 49 because I'm going to come back to that in the final point. I want you to go forward to verse 50. So think about this. He's got a new status. He's got a new position. He's got a new name. He's got a new spouse. Now, God blesses Ra, priest of On, bore to him. Now, look at verse 51. Who does the naming here? Put a star by that in your notes or somewhere. Write that down somewhere because I think this is significant that Joseph names them. Now, keep in mind, we today, and maybe y'all can help me out. I don't want to chase this rabbit too hard, but anybody want to, your children, you gave them names. Were they family names? Huh? Part of them? Okay. I remember, I'm thinking about, I meant to mention this a while ago, we think about Joseph being 30 years old, and he has all of this. I'm looking here, is anybody here under the age of 30? Talking about, hey, when we get married and we have kids, if we have a boy, what name do you want? What name do you want as a girl? And so Chase Nathaniel was always going to be the first boy's name. And so sure enough, that's what Chase was born, and we named him that. And I don't know where the name Chase came from, but I remember Nathaniel, Rita came up with that name because it's a Bible name. You'll remember in John's Gospel, chapter 1, when Philip is bringing his friend by the name of Nathaniel, Jesus makes the statement about Nathaniel, behold, an Israelite in whom there is no guile. Remember that? And so that's where that name Nathaniel comes from, okay? And so we named Chase that. That's the reason why I remember my 30s, or when I turned 30. Anybody else remember when you turned 30? Anything significant happened in your life?
When Sam turned 30, Elvis Presley died.
Is that right?
That's right. On his 30th.
1977. So let me do the math. 47. Huh?
Sam was 30 something, wasn't
You said he was 30 when Elvis died. Elvis died in 77. So I'm doing the math going back. So he was born in 1947.
he? Yeah.
That's what it meant.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't saying that Sam was 47. No, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
40, okay.
That kind of ruined your illustration, wouldn't it? Yeah.
You done got her all
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But getting back to the rabbit that I was chasing, kind of reeling him back in, talking about the giving of names. You know, we give names because they're sentimental to family or maybe because we like them. But back in the Bible days, they gave names for significant meanings because every name had a meaning to it. And what does he name his oldest, his firstborn? Manasseh. All right, Janice or Bob, what's the name Manasseh mean? That's exactly right. What does it mean? Yeah, the name Manasseh means to forget. Okay, so think about that. What's the significance of him naming Manasseh? Because God has caused me to forget what, Janice? Now, let's just pause there for a second and think about that. What is it that God's caused him to forget? Yeah, I think that's right, Jewel. I think it's all the struggles and all the setbacks and all of the problems that he's experienced. Now, let me just pause right here and just say that. You think, well, Brother Bill, do you believe that he literally forgot that? No, I don't. But here's the thing. God has set him up, and God had moved, and God had blessed to where no longer that was something that consumed his mind. There's a reason why when you're in your car, you've got a great big old windshield and a little bitty rearview mirror. Sometimes it's necessary to look in that rearview mirror, right? To see where you've been and what's behind you. But the focus ought to be what? Going forward. And I think this is true that's a good illustration, by the way, if I do say so myself. I think it's important for us to remember that he called him Manasseh because God had so moved and blessed in his life that no longer was he feeling sorry for himself. I'm not even saying that he ever got to that point, but you got to think he was human. As godly as he was still human. That maybe there were times of doubt in his mind, okay? But he always knew that God had his best interests, even though he had one setback after another. The harder he served God, the worse it got sometimes. But he knew that God had given him a promise. God had given him that divine dream to begin with, and that God was going to keep that promise. In fact, notice what he does in verse 50, 51, and 52. The Bible says in verse 51 that Joseph called the name of firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Again, I don't think that he completely just wiped it from his brain, his mind, but rather he was no longer consumed or focused on that. And then when you look at verse 52, not only did God bless that matrimony with one son, but God also gave him another son, verse 52. And the name of the second, again, who named him? Joseph did. This time, what did he call him? What does that name mean? For God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. So if Manasseh means to forget, Ephraim means twice fruitful. And here's what he means. I think he's implying here that even though I've gone through some very difficult trying and some strong adversity in my life, God's caused his plan to be worked out in my life that I am now twice better off than I was before this adversity ever started. Now think about that. God bless that union, okay? So we see Joseph's new status, Joseph's new surname, Joseph's new spouse, Joseph's new offspring, and then last but not least, verses 46, 49, 53 through 57, we see Joseph's new service opportunity. Because think about what's happening here. Remember, Joseph, when he interpreted the dream of Pharaoh, remember what he said to him? He said, you're going to have 7 years of incredible blessing. But you need to understand, there's going to be 7 bad years. Matter of fact, it'll almost make you forget those 7 good years. And what you need to do is be wise and put back enough in the plentiful years that you can overcome the days of adversity. And that's exactly what happens. Look what happens in verse 47. Now in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. This is verse 47, verse 48. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt and laid up the food in the cities. And he laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Again, he's heeding his own advice. In fact, verse 49 said, and Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea. I would think that's quite a bit, wouldn't you? He gathered as much grain as the sand of the sea, and watch this, so much so until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. Now fast forward to verse 53. Then the 7 years of plenty, which were in the land of Egypt, what? Ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. And the famine was not, watch this, not just in the land of Egypt. It wasn't just the immediate vicinity of Egypt that was being impacted, but we're told here, what else? It was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. Now here's the significance of this. Look at verse 55. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, okay, the people cried to Pharaoh. They come running to Pharaoh, and they say to Pharaoh, hey, what are we to do? And what does Pharaoh say? Why are you asking me? Go to Joseph and watch this. Whatever he says to you, what? That you do. Verse 56. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. Man, it's being expanded further than I originally believed. And Joseph opened, watch this, all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. And so all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the land. So think about this. God had prepared him through the ability to interpret these dreams and given him godly wisdom and discernment about, look, don't just celebrate and enjoy the fruitfulness of the land for those 7 years, but be wise and be a good steward and put back enough to compensate for the difficult years that are bound to come. In fact, Joseph put so much back, he said he was not able to count it anymore. It was as much as the grains of the sands of the sea, which is an amazing thing. You stop, think about it. So not only are they have enough for Egypt, but think about this, they have enough for, in essence, the entire world as needed. Amazing thing. Now let me ask you, where did that wisdom come from? It came from God. And how much more should we be asking God on a daily basis, not just for our personal lives, but for our families' lives as well as the life of our church? God, give us wisdom. Give us discernment that we might know what you want us to do. And so we see Joseph's new service opportunity. And you're going to see this become more and more big and larger as we go forward, because not only were the lands surrounding Egypt and people coming from all faces of the earth to buy grain from Egypt, but who's eventually going to come if you read this story? Joseph's own family, and we'll get to that in the coming days. Well, let me ask you this. What would be 3 applications or 3 takeaways? Now, you may have come up with different ones, but let me give you these 3 that I think that I want you to write down. Number 1, takeaway number 1, we need to be careful to guard against discouragement in times of struggle. Any of you ever struggle? Any of you ever face adversity? And what's usually one of the first things that shows up on your doorstep when you're going through adversity? I don't know about you, but I speak for me, discouragement. Discouragement. And I'll tell you something, you know this to be true, that discouragement is one of the cheapest tools of our enemy, Satan. Satan has come to seek, to kill, and destroy. He's come to make your life miserable. But what did Jesus say that he's come to do? To give you life and to give it to you how? More abundantly. Does that mean it's always going to be all roses and no thorns? Listen, I'm not sure you're saved 5 minutes that you don't quickly discover that you are not immune to adversity coming into your life. And by the way, if you've doubted that we live in Silsbee, for the last couple of days of sunshine, listen to what's going on outside right now. The rain's coming, okay? And so let me exhort you to guard against discouragement in the face of adversity and struggle. And I think that you see that in the life of Joseph. Amen or oh me. Takeaway number 2. Again, these are my takeaways. Maybe you got something different. Takeaway number 2. Don't let your past determine your future. Don't let your past determine your future. I can't tell you the number of times that people have told me, well, God can never use me because this, and this. Well, God can never do this through my life because of this, and this. I've blown it. I'm no longer usable in the eyes of God. Let me tell you something. As long as God gives you breath, I don't care where you are in your stage of life. You may not be able to physically do the things that you used to do, but God's got a plan and a place for you, for every single one of us. One of the things you never do, you never retire in the kingdom of God. You may get a new service opportunity, but you never retire. And so don't become a person who's content to sit on the pew, to sit, soak, and sour, okay? God's not done with you. You may not do the same thing all your life, but maybe that God's given you a new open door to go do something else. Amen? We're just kind of talking about that, Jewel, right? And so don't let your past determine your future. And then last but not least, write this down. That whatever God gives you, whatever opportunity God gives you, use it for His glory and not your own. What is Joseph doing here in this new opportunity? Is there any doubt that he's going to use it for God's glory? In fact, you remember when he comes to the end, the book of Genesis in chapter 50, and his brothers finally discover, he reveals who he is to his brothers. Remember what he said? He said, you guys intended it for evil. But who? But God intended for good. In fact, you look at Joseph's life, talking about a man of integrity. Read from chapter 37 to chapter 50 and see how many times he is constantly bringing up God and God's role in his life. And so let me exhort you and encourage you that when God gives you opportunity, don't just sit on it. Don't just fold it up and stick it in your back pocket and thinking, man, I'll save that for later. No. Use opportunities that God gives you for His glory and not your own. Curious, do you have any other application or takeaways from tonight's study? Not everybody at one time, please.
Only one thing, reading after one of the guys said, you got to separate knowledge from wisdom.
Yeah.
He says, God gave him the knowledge of what was coming, but He also gave him the wisdom of what to do about it.
Yeah, if you're not hearing what Jill said, that there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom, and I would 1,000% agree with you, because it's one thing to have the knowledge. It's another thing to have the wisdom to do with that knowledge, right? There is a difference. I know a lot of people that have book knowledge that don't even have common sense. You're thinking when God was giving out common sense, they thought He was talking about pocket change. No, God gives us common sense. God gives us wisdom. And so we need to apply that, right? Learn how to apply wisdom, apply knowledge. Anybody else? Are you enjoying this part of the book of Genesis, the life study of Joseph? Again, he is a man of integrity. Again, did he have opportunity to check out on God? Sure he did. But what did he remain steadfast and faithful? And I think what you're going to see over and over again, that God is rewarding faithfulness. And I believe this, does God reward faithfulness today? Indeed, you come to the New Testament, the Bible talks about he who is faithful in the little things, I'll cause you to be a ruler over much, right? Anybody else?